Welcome again, and thank you so much for joining the webinar today on state and regional programs supporting natural climate solutions. I'm really happy to see everyone tuned in here live, but I do want to just say that we will be recording today's session so that anyone who missed out can watch it later. We'll also be sharing the link out to anyone who registered if you want to revisit any of this content. My name's Sarah Mason. I'm a Senior Policy Associate at the Nicholas Institute for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability at Duke University, and I'm going to be moderating the session today. And I do want to say that after the presentations are finished, we will have a Q&A session. So if you do have questions for our presenters, please type them into the chat box and we can try to get to as many of those questions as possible at the end. This is the fifth webinar in a session or the fifth session of a series called Current Issues in Nature-Based Solutions. The series hosts are the National Ecosystem Services Partnership, or NESP, and the Resilience Roadmap Project. NESP is a coordinating platform for a network of public and private individuals and organizations working on implementation of ecosystem service concepts at the national level in the United States. And the Resilience Roadmap is a project really aimed at gathering expertise on climate resilience policy in the US and making actionable recommendations for how to build greater climate resilience through federal action. And we're going to drop some links to the hosting organizations in the chat if you want to learn more. And there will also be a link to the webinar series page if you want to see some of our past sessions. But if you'd like to stay informed about future sessions in the series or other related events, you can sign up for the NESP mailing list. This means you'll get our quarterly newsletter and any future webinar announcements. So you can either do that using the QR code on the screen or through the link that will be coming in the chat. And before we dive into the presentation today, I want to just quickly share a few new resources from NESP that might be of interest to those who are tuning in here. The first is the Department of the Interior Nature-Based Solutions Roadmap, which was just launched last week, and it was developed working closely with the Department of the Interior to produce a resource that could provide consistent and credible information about nature-based solutions through a DOI lens. And the roadmap features cross-cutting information about topics relevant to all different types of nature-based solutions, but then also contains detailed summaries for 29 specific nature-based solution strategies. The second is a set of resources that discuss how green banks and other community lenders could begin to scale up their financing of nature-based solutions and what pathways to doing that might look like. And we'll also be sharing links to both of those new resources in the chat. So with that out of the way, we can really get started in with our presenters to hear about these state and regional programs supporting natural climate solutions. We'll be learning today about the Regional Climate Protection Authority that works out in Sonoma County, California, as well as about the Forests as Climate Solutions Initiative in Massachusetts. And I'm very excited to welcome our great group of speakers, and I'll just introduce them all right now. First is Tanya Narath, Director of Climate Programs with the Regional Climate Protection Authority. Melissa Hoffer, Climate Chief of the Massachusetts Office of Climate Innovation and Resilience, is here. Stephanie Cooper, Undersecretary of the Environment with the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and Kurt Gartner, Assistant Secretary for Environmental Policy with the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. So we'll start off today with the Tanya and the Regional Climate Protection Authority. And whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you. Let me bring my presentation up. Okay, can you see that okay? Excellent. So good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm not sure what time zone everyone is in, but I'm out here in Sonoma County, California, and really delighted to be here with you today to talk about the work that we're doing here in Sonoma County. So wanted to start out with some background on the Regional Climate Protection Authority. We are a local government agency, and we support all of our local jurisdictions here in Sonoma County. Sonoma County has a long history of progressive environmental policy. We have an open space tax that was passed by the voters many years ago. We have a multimodal transportation tax, sales tax. Our cities have set urban growth boundaries, recognizing the importance of preserving open space around each of our communities. Our local water agency set a goal of delivering zero carbon water and achieved that goal in 2015. So many firsts related to preserving our natural environment here in Sonoma County. But back a number of years ago, although there was growing recognition of the importance of taking action on climate, there wasn't really certainty about how we could best pool our resources to address this huge and growing challenge. There was a lot of community-based activism. A local community-based organization was a real champion for climate action. And all of that raised the visibility of climate to our local policymakers. And they ultimately realized that they needed to form a new type of entity to help provide this coordination and collaboration on climate work. We already had a model of regional governance in the Sonoma County Transportation Authority. And so that board of directors for the Transportation Authority saw the power of the governance model and actually worked with our state elected officials to develop legislation that essentially created the RCPA back in 2009 through state legislation. And we are still the only agency of our type in California. So we are definitely unique when it comes to leading climate action locally. And on the slide, you see a couple stats in terms of the size and population of our county. And just to note that we have a wide range of types of environment here in Sonoma County, from our coastline to forested areas in different parts of the county. So RCPA really acts as the connective tissue for climate action across Sonoma County. I mentioned we're the only agency of our kind so far, and our board of directors, we share a board with the Transportation Authority, and the board consists of representatives from all of our 10 jurisdictions. And so what's really powerful about this is that it helps bring together and highlight the needs and policy priorities from everything from our smallest cities to the county of Sonoma as a total. And so our board has an opportunity to really identify policy solutions that will address the unique needs of our different jurisdictions. We also work closely with a number of partner agencies, which you can see on this screen. We have our Zero Waste Sonoma agency that's charged with waste management activities in the county. Sonoma Clean Power is our community-supported energy provider. And Ag and Open Space deals with obviously open space issues, and then our Sonoma Water. So we really have a unique opportunity to work across a number of different agencies on our climate solutions and plans. And then most recently, because one of the issues and challenges that we've had as an organization, especially on the climate side, because we don't have our own revenue measure, is the matter of funding, and how do we translate our ambitious climate action plans into actual results. And so in 2022, there was legislation passed at the state level to form what's known as a climate resilience district. And we were able to work with our legislators to actually get RCPA written in as an already established climate resilience district. And what this means for us is that we are now able to go out and seek additional revenue as an entity. We have the authority to do that. And this slide just shows a set of examples or lists of the types of funding that we could actually go after now as a climate resilience district. We did recently explore the possibility of putting a sales tax on the ballot in 2024, but unfortunately did not see enough community support for additional tax to support climate action. And so we're now looking at some of these other options on the list as ways to fund our climate work. So in terms of some of our accomplishments or our history over time, this slide just shows some of the major policy actions that our board has supported and adopted. Early on, we worked countywide to develop a climate action plan that was across the county, and it included not only the standard kind of greenhouse gas reduction actions, like electrifying transportation and buildings, but also had a section about natural and working lands and the types of climate solutions that we could be focused on there. In the late 2018-2019 time period, again, due to a lot of community support and concern about us not moving fast enough on climate, our local jurisdictions all adopted climate emergency resolutions, so kind of increasing the level of emphasis on taking action. And then as a result of those resolutions, our board directed us to develop a new strategy called the Sonoma Climate Mobilization Strategy. And I'll say a bit more about that in a few minutes. And then lastly, the funding efforts that I mentioned previously, all of this leading to a new goal that our board set to be carbon neutral by 2030, which we know is a very ambitious, audacious goal that we are working hard to move towards. So in terms of our mobilization strategy, it has initiatives in 3 different kind of main areas: transportation, buildings, and land and water. And I think for the call today, really the interest is focused on that land and water space. But just to note that we have strategies and objectives in the 2 other areas, transportation and buildings, that are more focused on greenhouse gas emission reductions. And then our land and water, which is really focused more on ecosystem improving our ecosystem health, as well as carbon sequestration. And then underlying all of our work that we do is a real strong focus on environmental justice and community engagement. So this is a chart that just shows our goals and where we are today, or as of 2020, when we did our last greenhouse gas inventory. We had set a goal of being 25% below our 1990 levels of greenhouse gas emissions by 2020. We didn't quite make it, but we made actually very, very strong progress given the challenges of achieving this goal. And then you can see both our Climate Action 2020 targets, which are aligned with the state of California's targets, as well as the green line there that shows what we need to accomplish to achieve our goal of carbon neutrality by 2030. And just a note there, we don't show that line going to 0 because we don't see any way to accomplish that, at least given what we know now in terms of emission reduction solutions. So that the note there is that difference between our reductions and getting to 0, we really see being achieved through increased carbon sequestration, which ties into our discussion today about natural climate solutions. So then just a quick peek at the state's climate goals. So in 2022, periodically the state updates what's known as the scoping plan, which is California's plan for achieving the climate goals that are set out by the state. And so this scoping plan was focused on, again, achieving carbon neutrality. And just to note that also at the state level, there is a strong focus on the natural and working lands and the importance of sequestration there, as well as, especially in California, with our wildfires, the fact that those natural and working lands, unfortunately, also become at times emitters of carbon. But we're really focused on this natural and working lands piece for the carbon sequestration. So very recently, our partners at the County of Sonoma's Climate Action and Resiliency Division sponsored a study to evaluate the carbon sequestration potential in Sonoma County. And this is a very important study as part of our mobilization strategy to really understand how much carbon could we sequester and what are some of the types of projects that we should be considering to do that. So this map shows kind of our diversity of landscape, from the forested areas that I mentioned to more of the grasslands in the lighter green, and the total amount of carbon that is sequestered. And most of that stock is held currently in the forested areas that are in the west and east, as well as the wetlands in the south part of the county. So in the study, it identified a number of different areas or opportunities for storing more carbon. One that's of special interest to our CPA, because we tend to work more on the urban landscape, whereas our county partners work in the natural and working lands, or the open spaces in the county. So the study recognized a huge potential in our urban forests to increase sequestration, and then also in a number of different areas, our riparian forest buffer on ag lands, rangeland planting, prescribed grazing, and compost on rangelands. So now with this study, we have a really good understanding at the different areas that we could focus on to increase our sequestration. And so just wanted to share briefly a little bit more about the different objectives that we have in the mobilization strategy, focused on 3 areas. So protecting what we already have stored, and that's really looking at our management practices in our forests. What can we do to both decrease the risk of future catastrophic wildfires, which we've had quite a few here in Sonoma County and California at large, and what techniques could we use to minimize the risk of additional carbon loss in our forests. That's an area of focus. In terms of increasing carbon stocks, really looking at the opportunities that we have with our local agricultural producers to implement carbon farm plans, assisting them with projects like no-till farming, planting hedgerows, and other types of practices that have been shown to increase sequestration, working with our local jurisdictions on projects to increase urban forest cover. And then ways and engagement strategies. We see a huge opportunity to involve our entire community in this process, increase education and understanding of what we can all do to protect our natural and working lands. And then lastly, this kind of goes back to my earlier comments around funding. There is a huge need. It's like we know what needs to be done in many cases, but we don't have the resources to actually accomplish that. And so one of the projects that I'll talk about in a few minutes has a component of the project to look at ways to finance these carbon sequestration projects. What opportunities do we have to not only bring in additional grant funding, but other sources of funding to support these projects? And then this is kind of looking at those three strategy areas in our mobilization strategy, and then the three kind of projects that I wanted to highlight briefly that we either have recently wrapped up or have in progress, and how they map to the different mobilization strategies. So we did some work on a tree protection study and recommendations, and we see that as really both protecting what we have as well as identifying opportunities for increasing carbon stocks. We have a great project underway that I'll talk more about in just a minute to apply compost to a number of different landscapes and evaluate the results from that. And then a very recent collaboration that's not only Sonoma County, but also in Marin County, that's looking at both the increasing carbon stocks as well as the infrastructure piece. So I'll talk a little bit more about each of those projects. So first, in the tree protection ordinances, we partnered with the Urban Sustainability's Directors Network Natural Climate Solutions Learning Group to bring in some grad students from Colorado, UC Colorado, to help us basically catalog the tree protection ordinances that we have in place across Sonoma County in all our jurisdictions and identify best practices, produce a report that has recommendations and resources for our jurisdictions to utilize. And they are starting to look at that report and identify ways that that information can be used to update their tree protection ordinances, as well as future planning efforts around urban tree canopy. And then we have our carbon sequestration through compost application pilot. And I should say one of the themes that I think runs through all of these activities is the strong collaboration that we see across the county, across different agencies. In the case of this project, we're partnering with a local CBO called Daily Acts to do the community-based work, the education and the engagement, as well as our partners in the Resource Conservation District. So it's been a great example of really coming together, united around a common goal, and that we're really a lot stronger and can achieve a lot more as a collaborative set of organizations. And this particular project was funded by money that came from the County of Sonoma's Climate Resiliency Fund. And these funds actually came from Pacific Gas and Electric as a result of settlements from the wildfires that we experienced here in Sonoma County. So our goal in the project, and we are nearing completion, is to complete compost application on 5 community and 5 ag sites. We've actually been able to do more agricultural sites because we set up this as a matching program, and we're able to make the dollars go further. And so in addition to the actual kind of selecting sites that are ideal for the compost application, working with them to apply the compost, we're also going to do an evaluation. We've got some tools that can help us estimate the amount of carbon that's been sequestered through this project. And then especially with the community sites, and these have been like at community parks and gardens, the project has been really successful in bringing community members together, providing education about composting and the benefits of that, and giving them some hands-on experience with that. And then the last project I wanted to highlight is what we call our Sonoma Marin Ag and County Climate Coalition. And Marin County is the adjacent county to our south, to the south of Sonoma County. And this is a really exciting partnership that went after a USDA grant, and we were awarded $10 million in total for this work. And the goals of the project are to create a regional supply chain and innovative tracking system and marketing campaign to really promote the benefits of implementing these climate smart practices, connecting the practices with the goals that we have in both Marin and Sonoma County's climate plans. So back to that sequestration goal that's so critical to our achieving our carbon neutrality goal. And then we are also looking at revising the greenhouse gas inventory that RCPA produces to better report the sequestration component of the activities that are happening and be able to show how that is helping us move towards our carbon neutrality goal. And this project is a huge collaborative effort. It has resource conservation districts from both Marin and Sonoma County. It has our local farm bureau, the County of Sonoma, the RCPA, an agricultural marketing organization, the Carbon Cycle Institute, which is providing a lot of our technical support. So a really great partnership between different organizations. And the other piece of this project that I'd like to highlight is we have a piece of the funding allocated to developing a carbon financing strategy that will help us identify ways we can secure additional funding to continue to support this type of work in both counties. So then lastly, I just wanted to highlight a couple of other local projects that RCPA is not directly involved in, but I think give a sense of the value and the importance that's placed here in Sonoma County on these nature-based solutions. So the city of Petaluma recently secured a $1 million grant from the USDA for their Petaluma Canopy project. So they'll be using that funding over the next 4 to 5 years to really build out their tree canopy in the city of Petaluma, which is a really exciting project. They have some great community groups involved in the project, and I think a solid plan for how they want to spend that funding. And then the second project is the County of Sonoma has a project that they are currently seeking funding for, their Green Corridors project. And this project recognizes the importance of developing community-based leadership and project development to create more urban green spaces that help connect communities together. And so, you know, it's the idea of looking at, especially in the parts of our county that are do not have the tree cover that the wealthier parts of our community have. You know, how can we build out that green space in a way that not only provides the environmental and social benefits of having the tree canopy, the cooling effects, et cetera, but start to think about linking and connecting those green spaces together, which has an aspect of active transportation as well as recreation and providing all of those wonderful benefits from those green spaces. So that's a project I'm really excited about, and we're certainly looking for ways to fund that project and make that project happen. And then the last one that is, I think, really exciting is the Santa Rosa Southeast Greenway. And the picture that I have here on the slide is of the Greenway in its kind of raw state. And this project is actually taking a former highway right-of-way that was planned to basically build a bridge and go through one of our beloved city and county parks to connect up a piece of our Highway 12 freeway. And a local group of citizens many years ago recognized the horror of disturbing what is a very loved local park with a freeway, and started campaigning and advocating for not doing that, and instead to basically convert this strip of land to a park. And the effort really started in earnest back in 2009, and I'm really excited to share that we expect early in 2024 that Caltrans, which is our state transportation agency, will be signing a purchase agreement with the city of Santa Rosa to transfer ownership of this land to the city. And then the next step would be a planning process with the community to determine how this, beautiful strip of land will be best used and meet community needs. And I imagine that there will be many different types of nature-based solutions that will be of interest for this piece of land. Community gardens, planting additional trees, I'm sure will be part of the plan, building a bike and ped path that will help people get from one end of the greenway to the other, and probably many other ideas that the community will bring forward. So that's also a very exciting project. And I think that brings me to the end of my presentation. Just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity, and I look forward to the question period.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I'm now going to just have us jump right into the presentation on the Forest as Climate Solutions Initiative. And I think we're going to just kick off hearing from Chief Hoffer.
Great, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here today, and I'm very proud to be here with my colleagues, Undersecretary Stephanie Cooper and Assistant Secretary Kirk Gertner. We're here today to talk about our Forest as Climate Solutions Initiative. I just wanted to offer a few framing remarks. And I wanted to echo Tanya's point about the importance of governance structures that really connect the dots in this climate work that we're engaged in. So 3 quick points for us. The first is really the value of having a pre-existing legal framework. So, California has that, as we just heard, with AB 32, and we have it here in Massachusetts with our Global Warming Solutions Act, passed back in 2008, one of the first of a handful of similar statutes, state statutes at the time, that put in place declining emissions reductions, and an economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions cap. So that provides the framework, and then that statute obligates the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, you're about to hear from today, to put in place 5-year plans that lay out how we're going to achieve the specific emission reduction goals. That act was amended just a few years ago in 2021 to add a net zero by 2050 mandate. So that's our framework, and there are 4 pillars of it. They're exactly the pillars you would expect: transportation, buildings, electric power sector, and natural and working lands, because we have a very similar graph which shows that we actually won't get to net zero without the contribution of carbon sequestration from our natural and working lands. So very helpful to have that framework. The second point is it's also really helpful to have a supportive state governance structure. So Massachusetts now, for the first time this year, has a cabinet level climate chief. That's my role. That was established by Governor Healy when she came into office. It was the first executive order that she signed. And the reason for it is the need to ensure that really across all of our secretariats, everybody is owning climate equally. We've had incredible leadership and really nation-leading leadership from our Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs on climate. And it's just too much. Like, it's too much for EPA to do all of the climate things that the federal government must do. It's too much for EEA to do all of the climate things that a state government must do. And climate change is something that touches on all these other things, like public safety, like health and human services, obviously like transportation and housing. So it's really important to have that thread and that integration and that sort of graceful de-siloing. And so a governance structure that can help create that is really, really important, and can also be a convening structure to bring people together on issues that cut across agencies, like Forestry does. And I think the last point on all of this is, the folks who work in our state agencies are really expert on what they do, and for a long time, whatever that is might not have had to do with climate change. And so asking people to begin to think about climate seriously and integrate it into their work on a daily basis it's a big change. It's a cultural shift. So it's really important when we're thinking about doing things like our Forest as Climate Solutions Initiative, or really like any of the other sort of cross-cutting initiatives that we're working on. There's really a need to have sustained support and continuing support from leadership across the administration to really make that happen, and within these agencies, because as we saw from the last presentation, it really does touch every aspect of life. So if we're going to solve this problem in the very limited amount of time that we have, it requires people to come together that might not typically work together, and it requires folks to learn and understand new frameworks for understanding new science as they're carrying out their responsibilities. So with that, I think we have an initiative that's really demonstrating that and is hopefully a model. And I'm going to turn it over to Undersecretary Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chief Hoffer, for that excellent introduction. So let's go to the first slide, the next slide, which just shows you how we're going to walk through our presentation today. And Chief Hoffer just gave a good introduction with some of the policy context. And then we're going to talk to you about our Forest as Climate Solutions Initiative, the overall approach, the goals that we're seeking to advance, and the 4 branches of the initiative. And it's an exciting time for us in this initiative. We've been at it just about 6 months, and we're about to hit a bunch of important milestones that will be announced soon. And today we're going to tell you about, a little bit about that, and why we're pursuing this initiative, what we're learning so far, how we've organized it, etc. So let's go to the next slide. So Chief Hoffer talked about our strong climate laws and then the plans that we must develop to implement them. And so this is our Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2050, which is our guiding framework for everything we do. And what we've pulled out here are some of the goals related to forests and as part of our natural and working lands work. So these are really advancing these goals, elevating them, expediting them is what was our starting point for Forest as Climate Solutions and developing this initiative. So it's about very aggressive land conservation goals. It's about really making the most of the carbon storage and sequestration potential in our natural and working lands, especially in our forests. Sustainable forestry is part of the puzzle. That's part of maintaining forests and avoiding conversion to other uses, which of course is so important. And then, we acknowledge wood as a low carbon bio-based solution as well. So let's go to the next slide. So a little bit of context about our forests. We have many wonderful natural assets in Massachusetts, and I would argue that our forests might just be our best one. There's a bit of a contest there, but I'll put that out there. And so this figure shows the New England region, and it shows the forest carbon stocks that we have. And you can see Massachusetts there. The western part of our state has some of the highest rates of the highest carbon storage in the whole region. And Chief Hoffer talked about that we need our forests and these carbon stocks to offset our remaining emissions in 2050. So it's incredibly important. So just talking about the forests in Massachusetts, almost 60% of our state is forested. That might be a surprise if you're thinking about the eastern part of our state that is more highly developed. About 17% of it is state land, so about 1 million acres are public, and about half of that is managed by our state. So we have one of the largest state park systems in the country, even though we're a small state. We manage for water supply for the lands that surround the drinking water for eastern Massachusetts, and then we manage to protect the habitat for rare and endangered species as well. And so part of our management is active, so timber harvesting. We harvest right now about 0.5% of the land every year. And we do that to advance various goals. So we do it to promote resilience to various stresses such as severe weather and diversifying the age and species of our forests. We also do it related to biodiversity and some specific types of habitat. And we also, so that's the sort of the active side of our management. And then we also have an important passive aspect to our management program, and that are our forest reserves. So right now we have 120,000 acres that are managed as reserves, and that means that we don't do timber harvesting, and more holistically than that, they're about natural processes taking their course. So that's sort of our starting point for this initiative. And let's go to the next slide. So we announced this Forest as Climate Solutions in June, like I said, just over 6 months ago. And so this initiative is about centering climate for our forests and everything about our approach to them. It's about elevating our land conservation goals. It's about a commitment to expand the network of forest reserves that we have. It's about applying the latest climate science to all aspects of our management, and then on state lands, but then also incenting those same goals, those same philosophies and techniques and approaches for private landowners as well, including intentionally managing for climate storage. So let's go to the next slide. I mentioned that we have 4 branches of the initiative, and we're going to tell you about those between Kurt and myself. So I'm going to tell you about the first one. And so this is about developing climate-oriented forest management guidelines for state lands. So this is the piece where we're really looking at our state lands management and looking at the latest science. And so what we've done is we convened a committee of experts in all aspects of, relevant to this, to look at the latest science and to recommend some approaches for us. And so we convened them in June. And so to sort of make time and space for this process, we paused our timber harvesting program on state lands for 6 months. And that's the period of time that we set out for this process, with the intention of then resuming that program once we had the new recommendations from our committee. And like I said, this is a really exciting time for us because our committee is just wrapping up its work, and soon we will have their recommendations. Let's go to the next slide. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about, let me tell you a little bit about the committee. I got ahead of myself there. So this is, their role is looking at what should the goals and objectives of our management be, looking at the latest climate science, and then providing some recommendations. And here we've just listed, I just talked about that we have a really esteemed, very impressive group of individuals from very high caliber organizations. And we are really grateful that they have given us a lot of time and expertise in a short time. And so it's been really helpful so far. And then next, I'm just going to give you a window into only some of the many topics that they have delved into their work. So let's go to the next slide. So in terms of sort of how they approach this, I think they sort of, zoomed out and talked about, when we think about forests, knowing the diversity of forests and also understanding the diversity of goals. Chief Hoffer talked about the sort of the existing or traditional missions of our agencies, and so they're all managing for different goals. And then now we have this, overarching primary goal of managing for climate change. So thinking about how all of that comes together. And they talked a lot about foundationally about the roles of passive and active management, and thinking of it on a continuum, and the importance of the roles for both in different situations. So passive on one end, where you really are not having human interventions. Like I was talking about forest reserves a couple of minutes ago, where you're letting those natural processes play out over the long term in a forest. And then moving along the continuum to an active approach, where you're intervening deliberately because you're reacting to a condition that you want to manage in the near term, or you're trying to create future conditions, or expedite a natural process on the landscape. So the committee also has been talking a lot about natural disturbances. We know we're having more and more of them with climate change, and sort of, maybe putting on a different pair of glasses in terms of how we think about those, and thinking about active management mimicking those cycles. And then when we do have those natural disturbances, being really deliberate in the way that we react. And thinking more about when we have a big blowdown, leaving those trees on the ground for the sequestration that they continue to provide, and then also for nurturing the soils, for example. Carbon storage obviously has been a center of this conversation, as you would imagine, and there's a lot of agreement, which leads to some of the policy recommendations that they will be making. But the really importance of old forests for the sort of the height of the carbon storage that happens in those conditions, and sort of managing to promote those conditions. And then acknowledging that there are different views and different interpretations of science about the specifics of when sequestration is maximized, but overall enough important agreement to steer us in a good policy direction. In terms of managing for resilience, which I've talked about a little bit, there are definitely different views, and I think there's there's important guidance that comes with both of them to be applied in different situations. So when you are intervening with active management because you're trying to create different conditions in the shorter term, diversifying the types of species that are there, or bringing along species in an understory, and then the notion of passive management, where the idea that our forests are naturally resilient and that nature will achieve and give us that diversity over time. And then just to note I think this last issue is an example of thinking about our traditional mission, and then thinking about how climate change, addressing climate change may reshape that to some degree. So the notion of managing for habitat, which is a really important goal of ours. Our governor signed a really strong order for biodiversity, which will be setting new goals for biodiversity in the next few months. But part of our program is managing for habitat for species that need open environments to thrive. And so the notion of what are the carbon implications of creating that kind of habitat when it involves removing trees. So thinking, setting us on a course to examine that, which I think will be really an important process for us to undertake. And let's go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, I went into Kurt's area. I just will end and I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Kurt Gardner, who has been my partner undertaking this initiative. I was just going to note, in doing so, he's going to talk about the other branches that the Climate Forestry Committee has also been really interested in, the other branches, and you'll hear that too in the course of his remarks. So I'll turn it to Kurt now.
Thank you, everyone. The next major aspect of the initiative or branch is avoiding conversion of forested land, one that has enjoyed universal support. This is one everyone stands behind. And of course, one of the best ways of doing that is permanent land conservation, whether that's land to be held by state agencies, by land trusts, or by municipalities. The Clean Energy and Climate Plan calls for 40% conserved by 2050. Another 685,000 acres amounts to a doubling of the pace of land conservation in the Commonwealth, and doing that in ways that conserves forests for all of the benefits, including carbon, that we would expect. A second major aspect of the initiative, or of this branch of the initiative, is avoiding conversion. Even with that aggressive land conservation objective, there will be a lot of privately held forest land that could be converted to other types of use, say housing or a commercial development. And we want, through the initiative, to be strategic, to try to limit the amount of conversion and to be strategic about where that conversion takes place in order to limit the implications for our natural and working lands and forests in particular. And then finally, reserves. Part of the acquisition efforts, part of what we're going to be doing here with some of our existing land holdings, relates to setting more of the forested lands of the Commonwealth aside, places where nature is more left to run its course for the carbon and other benefits. That will be something we look at for state land holdings, and that we're interested in working on land holdings by others as well, whether that's conserved land held by a municipality, by a land trust. And lastly, this is something where we're going to take a look at codification. Right now, while we have over 100,000 acres of reserves on state lands, those are done administratively, and we're going to take a look at codifying and making permanent those reserves through statute. Next slide, please. The third branch relates to incentives. The Commonwealth, as was mentioned, holds about 17% of forest land, and that means that others, municipalities, private landowners, hold most of the forests of the Commonwealth, and we want to offer them incentives for the same sort of climate-oriented management that the Commonwealth will be pursuing. This will take a variety of forms, incentives for conservation, incentives to manage in a climate smart way using current use programs. I think many states have, including, I'm guessing, a number on the participating today. And we also want to work with our forest-based businesses and rural communities. We believe that there's opportunity for enhanced practices as forestry is taking place in the field, in the forest products businesses, to reduce emissions, to better take care of the environment, reduce soil disturbance and the like. And so we have an aspect of the initiative that is very much about incentives for enhanced practice by landowners and by forestry-based businesses. Next slide, please. Finally, an aspect of the initiative is data, about using the very best science, about paying attention to what ongoing work on climate change is telling us and how to manage our forests. So an aspect here is collecting more data, better integrating data into what we do, and also being much more transparent about how we are utilizing data and about how forestry and land management is being performed by state agencies. We intend to provide that information through state websites and other sources, and just generally looking to integrate and make sure others are able to integrate the latest science into how we are approaching land management. So that concludes the 4 branches of the initiative, and I'm going to turn it back over to the Undersecretary to wrap us up.
Okay, great. Let's go to the next slide. So we just wanted to quickly talk to you about the process that we've undertaken here, and there are a couple of different elements of it. So we just told you about 4 branches of this initiative. So we set up internal teams across our 3 divisions that manage the lands to carry them out. So they're work groups, and one aspect of that was really important to involve staff who have all different aspects of roles in land management to be part of the process and to be learning and bringing the expertise that they have, and then figuring out how does embracing the climate change charge, what does that mean for their role and for these particular initiatives. External engagement was really important, and we held 2 very large, well-attended virtual public meetings to inform the Climate Forestry Committee's process. And then in terms of the other branches, like for example, thinking about incentive programs, we had a number of focus groups with forest landowners and businesses. And then we've also been talking to the land conservation community when it comes to expanding our conservation efforts, including forest reserves on lands that are not publicly held. It was important for us, for the Climate Forestry Committee, to have sort of professional support for a process that was taking place over in a short period of time, involving these experts whose time we wanted to use well. So we had a facilitator to help with that, and then we've dedicated a portion of our time to make sure that we are really moving the process along in the way that we intended. And then I'll just quickly go to sort of next steps and tell you where things stand now. So as we've talked about throughout this, our overarching goal is keeping our forests as forests, knowing that we have a mix of public and private ownership in the state, and knowing that we will encourage passive management, and we will encourage active management at the same time as part of keeping our forest space. We're going to soon be going into an implementation aspect of this initiative. We've talked about guidelines and recommendations that we're expecting from our expert committee very shortly. So we'll be, taking those and figuring out how we implement those. How do we integrate those into land management plans that we have, and the like. We'll be working on our initiative to expand reserves. So both thinking about the places on public land. So thinking back to the figure that I showed you with the intense carbon storage in the western part of our state, for example, and then thinking about our acquisitions and conservation. And then also continuing to support private forest landowners. We have dedicated funding for this initiative, and we'll be talking more about that in terms of our 6-month announcement. But that's really important to move all of these different branches, and then to be able to have resources to partner with others. Kurt talked about our commitment to expand our monitoring and use of good data, and to share that with the public so that we can all learn going forward. And then that engagement piece will be really important too. So that's something that we've obviously done as part of this initiative, but we've been thinking about it in terms of our public lands management for going forward to expand our communications efforts. So with that, I think I'll conclude. I know that our time is short and we want to have time for question and answers, but we've included our contact information here too, and we'd be happy to follow up after this too. So thanks for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for those great presentations. I think they gave us a good glimpse of a couple different approaches to government programs working on natural climate solutions and also some of the legal frameworks that support those programs. So I do want to head into the Q&A portion of the day. Remember, if you have a question for our speakers, please do drop that in the chat. And I just want to start out with one. I'm going to steal one quick first question. That's for Tanya. And in a lot of my work on nature-based solutions, there's been a lot of talk about building out the workforce to kind of scale up this type of work. And I noticed in the climate mobilization plan, under the scaling up infrastructure, it talked about workforce programs. So I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about what the approach to that is.
Sure, and I would say we're in the early stages of that, and it's really happening probably more so at our partners at the County of Sonoma, looking at future workforce needs, both in terms of the natural climate solutions as well as the other areas of climate work like building electrification, the impact of EVs, et cetera. So really trying to identify and forecast what are those current and future needs, and then what types of training programs do we need to put into place to really prepare folks for that. I would say as we work on this USDA grant, our partners are already, looking at what staffing needs they have to actually implement those plans. So it's definitely in the early stages, I would say.
And I'll just throw it to the Massachusetts side. Is that at all part of the Forest Climate Solutions Initiative as well?
So I can start. This is the question about conflicts.
Workforce.
Oh, workforce. I don't think I see the question.
Oh, no, it was just sent to me, but it's just about are there sort of efforts to scale up the workforce who could kind of work on these nature-based solutions in the state?
Oh, go ahead.
Yes, narrowly in this space, one aspect that was suggested to us by the Climate Forestry Committee has to do with professionals in the forestry businesses, that we are lacking sufficient consulting foresters to advise landowners on climate smart forestry practices. So even in this space, workforce has been part of the conversation, but certainly within the building sector, within the energy sector, and renewable energy aspects that are part of the broader Clean Energy and Climate Plans and Global Warming Solutions Act compliance, that very much has been part of the focus of the administration as a whole, not just energy and environmental affairs, but as the chief mentioned, it's a whole of government, labor and workforce development, and all the other departments of state government as well.
And I see a question here asking about what is Massachusetts doing to avoid the incursion of solar farms into currently forested lands? But we could broaden that out, how are you sort of dealing with other land development needs and sort of balancing that with these sequestration goals?
So I guess I'd answer that in two ways. One, we didn't mention yet, but we have an Energy Infrastructure Commission that is meeting now, looking at meeting our needs for clean power generation and all the infrastructure that goes with it, and how it can do that in a way that is sensitive to forests and other natural and working lands. And that at the same time, the Commonwealth also has a really demonstrated need for additional housing production. We have been one of the states producing some of the least housing across the nation. And there is a need to produce more housing, again, in ways that will not come at great cost to our forests and other natural and working lands. And we have some intentions relative to proactive land use planning and other things that will help us get at making all of these things as compatible as we can be, just reducing the footprint impact of solar and other facilities.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And, this is a problem that is common in many states, but it really, it's hard sometimes to know at the outset in designing a solar incentive program exactly what the, unintended consequences of it may be. And in Massachusetts, unfortunately, one of those unintended consequences is that we saw a lot of ground mount solar in previously forested land. So one lesson or one important thing, in response to the person who asked the question, is that that's had a very unfortunate effect of creating a backlash against solar in central and western Massachusetts, which we really need people to be on board with the need for new renewable energy and all the infrastructure that supports it, as the Assistant Secretary was just saying. So, part of what we're trying to do now is repair that and think more, think about how we can do a better job of targeting the solar to where we really need it, because not only was some of it in forests, it was also not located near hosting capacity, which made it very expensive and lengthy to interconnect. So these are really important lessons. And when you think about like comprehensive planning for the state, we're at the very early stages of starting to think about how to do some of that. Because like as we were saying at the outset, climate change requires us to think really differently. So, having some map really where we're thinking about, here's where we're going to put the renewable energy facilities. Here's where the terrestrial wind will go. Here's where the solar may go. Here's where we want to maintain the forests. Here's where we have the hosting capacity. Here's where we want to direct the housing. Hopefully that's near the transportation. And that allows us to prioritize at the same time grid modernization efforts that will be needed then to meet the needs of electrified housing and retrofits. So this is a really important question because it underscores for me, listening to it, the need for this integrated planning. Climate change is going to drive that. It's really different from what we've had in the past.
So we are running up against our time here. So I am going to cut us off on the Q&A, but I think all our speakers did provide their contact information. So if anyone does want to reach out, they can either reach out to me if they didn't get those emails or directly to them. But I do want to just take a moment here at the end to thank the panelists once again for sharing their time with us today. And thank you to everyone who joined. It's really exciting to hear about these types of programs, and hopefully conversations like this can lead to these types of efforts taking shape elsewhere. So please look out for an email from me sometime next week that will share a link to the recording along with resources that were mentioned today. And thanks again to everyone who's here, and have a great weekend. Bye.